My name's Jo Boswell. I'm director of Sentio-B. That is a consulting firm that I set up about 18 months ago to help organisations realise their ambitions and realise their potential with customer experience. So in my session this afternoon, as we're in the Customer Experience Theatre, I'm going to be touching on some general trends around customer experience and talking about the capabilities that organisations really need to develop in order to deliver great experiences for their customers. And I'm also going to take you through a case study, which is my own personal experience of delivering a major transformation in customer experience that was towards the end of a very lengthy career with British Airways. So let me start off by just posing a question around what it is that makes a great customer experience. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this quote from Maya Angelou, but the reason that I love it is, for me, it really captures the essence of what a good customer experience is all about. And essentially, it's about an organisation that understands its customers so well that it's able to make them feel really special and recognised. It's about an organisation that has such deep understanding and intelligence on its customers that it is really able to anticipate their needs and work out how to deliver a value-added proposition for them. And if you think about it, that's really not a new concept. Many small businesses have succeeded at delivering that kind of experience for centuries because they understand and know their customers so well. But whilst that's not a new concept, I think what is really changing and what is really disrupting this whole arena is increasingly we are seeing some very big brands, and indeed in many cases some global brands, who are now starting to succeed at delivering that feeling of customer intimacy, but on a huge scale. And we're talking about delivering that intimacy and feeling of personalisation with millions of customers in multiple channels and often very many different countries. And as a result, customer expectations are increasingly evolving. And today, our expectations as customers for any brand in any industry sector are being set by some of these brands, the logos of which you see on the screen here. They are now setting the standard for all of us. So, in trying to understand and distill what really makes a great customer experience, a framework that I really like to refer to is this one that was developed about 10 years ago by KPMG Nunwood. And what they've done with this framework is they've really distilled great customer experience down into 6 essential ingredients. And I won't read through all of them because you can refer to those reports in your own time. But interestingly, the point about personalisation, the top one, so tailoring the experience to individual customers, and then also the element of reducing time and effort, taking those moments of friction out of the customer journey to save time for customers. Those 2 elements have been shown in KPMG Nunwood's research to have the biggest impact on customer loyalty and advocacy. And I think the interesting thing when you think about some of those brands that were on that previous slide is what they're doing particularly well is harnessing their customer data and technology to deliver against these 2 elements of personalisation and saving their customers time and effort. So why is all of this important? Well, interestingly, this research from Bain from last year, so this was a UK consumer survey that looked at some 190 brands in 15 different industry sectors in the UK, has shown that for customers who effectively deliver a high net promoter score, so rate the brands that they're dealing with very highly and are prepared to recommend them, effectively we see that they are less likely to switch, they are more likely to recommend and tell other people, and they're 20% more likely to use self-service. Now that last point I think is quite interesting, because I think it's one of those chicken and egg situations. Are they more happy and therefore they use self-service, or is it the other way around? But the point is, this is delivering tangible business value to the bottom line for many businesses. Now, it's quite a while, nearly 15 years since this very alarming wake-up call, which is also some Bain research from 2005, that illustrates the enormous gap in perception between CEOs of companies who felt they were delivering a great service and the reality of what their customers really felt about those organizations. But if we fast forward to some more recent research, I think it would still be fair to say that a lot of organizations are really struggling to keep up with the pace at which customer expectations are evolving. And so we have this really worrying sort of increasing gap effectively between customer expectations and the ability of organizations to evolve their experience in line with that. So why is it proving quite so hard to keep up with those evolving expectations? And I think the reality is there is often a very common starting point in most organizations, which is the customer data will reside in a lot of different operational systems, and it's therefore extremely hard to use, and in particular to join up at a customer level. The organization itself is often built around different functions, be that different channels that are interacting with the customer, or potentially around different products. And again, it's very hard to join up a single view of the customer experience across those different organizational divisions. And as a result, what happens for the customer is that this often ends up being quite a disjointed experience. In effect, they are a single person looking at an organization, but internally that organization is really struggling to reflect that single view back to them. So, first lesson of the day in terms of how to start to create much more of a customer mindset is that you need to think about how you're engaging with customers as an ongoing dialogue. So what do I mean by that? I mean that you need to shift your thinking away from having a message or a product or an offer and trying to decide which customers you're going to target that message to. And you need to start thinking about, actually, how can I have an ongoing conversation? What is the next thing that I need to say to this customer in this conversation? It means switching your focus away from starting with an offer that has been developed as a result of a business or a commercial need, to starting with the customer need as the starting point for how to develop that proposition or that message. And it means moving away from that approach of, okay, I've got something to say, I've just developed a new product, I'm now going to push that message out to as many customers as possible, to getting to that point where you know with each customer what is the right thing to say at this point in time. And when you get to that conversational ability, you're in a situation where you're much better able to demonstrate empathy for the customer's current context. And I really love this example from the low-cost South African airline, Kalila, who've worked really hard at thinking about how they can manage every interaction with their customers as a means of exchanging information in a conversation. And this example is where instead of sending their regular sort of survey email, they're acknowledging the fact that for this particular customer, they've had a service failure. So that's at least acknowledged in that communication. So what are the capabilities that you need to create that ongoing conversational ability internally? Well, I think of it really as two simple things. The first is, are you really listening to your customers? Now, customers are giving off signals really in every interaction that they have with your organization. And they expect you to be tuning in to those signals. So you've got to develop that acute listening capability by starting to gather all of the information that resides in different data repositories in your organization and gathering that at a customer level so you can start to really understand how they're interacting with you. And you need to invest in the tools and the analytics skills to be able to deliver intelligence from all of that wealth of data. So customer listening is the first building block. The second is that you then need to be able to act on those insights in a joined up dialogue with your customers. And that means, on the one hand, being able to step into the customer's shoes and see the organization through their eyes. And the best way of doing this is by having a customer journey map that really is identifying what your customers' needs and sentiment is likely to be at different stages in the journey, and thinking about how your data and information can help to inform and improve those stages. And then the second element in this orchestration capability is about having the sophistication in all of your channels to be able to act on that insight. And we're talking about channels that are interacting with customers that are both physical and digital. So that sophistication may be something as simple as, are you able to tailor a message in your digital app or on your website? But it may be just as much about if you're serving up insight to a frontline colleague or to somebody in the contact center, so where there's a human interaction, do they have the skills and the confidence to know how to use that information? So it's about that channel sophistication. And all of this really needs to be underpinned by a very deliberate approach to governance. And this is governance that frankly may well cut across your existing business processes today. So the first is having that single customer planning framework that I already touched on the previous slide. But the key here is that it is a single framework. And believe me, I've worked in quite a few organizations where different channels have their own version of a customer journey map. So again, no wonder that it's difficult to tie it together. So the key is it needs to be a single customer journey map that the entire organization participates in. But equally, I think it's just as important to establish a set of principles around how different customer messages will be prioritized, and then ultimately to underpin this approach with a different set of KPIs and metrics that you can use to start to really tie together different departments and get them collaborating towards common customer goals. Because so often when you have a sort of siloed focus, a lot of it is driven by the performance metrics that are currently in place that tend to drive that slightly competitive behaviour. So it is when all of these elements come together that I think you get that sort of 90-degree shift from being a sort of product-first company working in vertical silos to having that really truly joined up customer-first ongoing dialogue approach. Now, I'm often asked by organisations, where do the biggest challenges lie? And I think a lot of times companies that I work with assume that the hardest bit to solve is going to be around the data or the technology. And whilst indeed these can be quite challenging situations and problems to tackle, I think they're the most obvious ones, but the more important element to address is less about the data and the technology, and it is more about the cultural change and the fact that you're probably working against some legacy processes and performance management systems that have existed in the organisation for decades. So companies that really succeed in invigorating their customer experience in this way, what I see is this is led from the top with a CEO who is beating the drum about how the organisation needs to change and why, and they're building this into their DNA, ensuring that every part of the organisation understands what they need to do differently and has the skills and the confidence to be able to do that. And so those are very important elements to drive that internal change. So now I'm going to turn to my own experience of delivering this kind of transformation when I was at British Airways. And to begin with, I'd like to give you a little bit of context here. Hopefully everybody in the room is familiar with the airline as an organisation. And we were, back in 2010, evaluating our corporate strategy. And actually, BA's success, up until that point, had often resided around innovation in product development. So BA had been the first to market with a flatbed in business class and first class. And a lot of the investment in the corporate strategy went into that product development. But in 2010, the situation was that we had a lot of competitors who by that stage had invested even more money in that kind of hard product. And so corporately, the strategy was to aim to differentiate around service. And we knew that personalisation was a really important part of that. We had done some trials where we served up little insights, for instance, to cabin crew on board, and we knew that that had a huge impact on the way customers felt about us. So we wanted to build that into our overall approach. But BA is a big organisation, and we have a lot of colleagues dealing with some 13 million customers who are taking 45 million journeys a year. And so our big challenge was how do we deliver that personalisation at a real scale across what we estimated to be some 400 million interactions. And our starting point was no different to that which I described earlier on. So we had multiple departments wanting to communicate with customers for different purposes. They were using different systems, and those systems didn't talk to each other. We had no overarching system for really prioritizing which messages should get through. So we had some very blunt instruments that were filtering out messages. And we weren't considering the customer's current context. And what that meant was that at times, frankly, we were being quite clumsy. So for instance, if a customer had had a major service failure, the very next email they might receive could be a marketing email that was trying to sell them yet more flights. So we knew we had to find a way to create that more conversational dialogue and react to the customer's current context. So this is what we did. First of all, we invested in customer listening. Now, airlines traditionally are actually quite data-rich organizations, and BA in particular had invested a lot in its data approach for some other functions like revenue management and distribution. But we weren't really tuned into our customers. We had a partial view of those customers who were in our frequent flyer program, but it gave us an indication of some of their commercial transactions without giving us a complete picture of actually what was happening to them across all of their interactions with the airline. But not only that, whilst our frequent flyer customers clearly were very important to us, they represented just 50% of the airline's turnover. So in essence, we were kind of completely fingers and ears about the customers who were generating half of our turnover. So we started out by creating a single unique customer identifier for the entire customer base, and that enabled us for the first time to see who all of our customers were. And then we started gathering the relevant data points at a customer level to start to understand their entire experience with the airline. And that revealed some very interesting insights. So, for instance, our second most valuable customer, it turned out, was not even in the executive club, revealing some rather lazy thinking that had been happening internally, which in effect said executive club equals high value. But equally, we were also able to start to track which types of service failures were those, which were likely to make our customers defect. So it revolutionized our understanding of the customer base. Secondly, we then set out to start to use the insights that we had to see what kind of impact we could have when we personalized different interactions in the customer experience. So we gathered together a cross-functional team, and we started conducting a series of experiments to see what the results would be when we used our data and analytics models to personalize interactions in marketing emails, in our contact centers, on the website, but also in person. So when customers were checking in and when they were on board our aircraft. And as a result of that, we had some resounding results that personalization really did work for our business. So that was great. It gave some big confidence to want to continue to invest further. But we still had that challenge of how can we then scale this up across those 400 million interactions. So the final piece then was to implement that new governance approach that I described earlier on, a single customer journey plan working with different parts of the business to work out how we could use data and insights across all touch points in the customer journey to inform and improve. And all of this was underpinned with some really smart technology that enabled us to pull together those propositions that we had developed with our data, with our analytics models, and ultimately then helping to react to the customer's current context to deliver that right conversation with the right customer at the right point in time. So, to bring it all to life with a little example, I'm going to talk to you about our servicing emails, which changed as a result of this approach. Now, the servicing email is that email that you get once you've booked a flight, but before you travel. And essentially, it contains some important information about what to do, how to check in, and so on. But actually, that servicing email had been a one-size-fits-all for all of our customers for as long as we could remember. So regardless of whether you were a regular business traveller through Terminal 5 who always checks in on the mobile app, or somebody who might actually be travelling for the first time through that airport, everybody got the same information in that email. And what we found from the data and insights is that actually for families travelling with young children, and in particular if that was the first time they'd undertaken a journey with young children, they were particularly anxious about what was going to happen in the journey. They didn't know how they were going to keep the children entertained on board. They might be worried about, needing to take certain food, baby food, and with the liquids ban, how's that going to work? And also they were worried about what to do with the pushchair. At what point am I going to have to leave that? Am I going to be, trying to drag my children through the airport? And interestingly, when we started to delve into this, we realized that the airline had as many policies around when to check in your pushchair as we had airports that we flew to around the globe. So interestingly, I think what this revealed to us is that when you start to step into the customer's shoes and think about what data is relevant and how you can inform and improve that stage of the journey, it sort of really revealed that we needed to be thinking differently about how we developed that content. But in doing that, using the technology that we had, it enabled us to be relevant, personalised and joined up, but in a way that was really efficient. And so our marketing teams, instead of worrying about segmentation and how many customers they were going to reach, could spend their time thinking about how they were going to develop that different content. So that's the case study from BA. I'm going to leave you with just 4 takeout points that you can think about. This would be my 4-point plan if you want to approach this kind of customer experience improvement in your own organizations. So the first is look at your data and think about where you have those opportunities to really listen more closely to your customers. And there are certainly plenty of vendors in a conference like this today that can help you with that. Secondly, think about how that data can be used to inform and improve different stages in that customer's journey. Step into their shoes and think of it from their point of view. Look at the way your organization is set up to deliver for the customer and think about what changes you need to make to potentially the structure, but at least to your business processes and to your governance, so that you can deliver that kind of joined up conversation. And finally, the last but absolutely the most important point, think about how you're going to lead that internal cultural change, because that really is the hardest bit to get right, and it's the bit that requires the most attention. And so finally, I'm going to leave you with this quote that I found from Professor of Marketing at INSEAD, which for me really encapsulates everything that I've been talking about this afternoon, and I think is a really useful one to hold top of mind. So just as much as it is about the data and the technology, it is very much about mindset and culture. So thanks very much for your attention today. Great to see so many people here. Personally, I find this kind of environment is really difficult to take questions, but I will be very happy to take any questions at the back if anybody wants to come and see me. Thank you.